Welcome back.
Hi.
It's been 3 whole minutes.
Yes. Judy Nathan's here.
Robert Winter's here.
Yes.
And we thought that for this segment, what we would do is we'd touch upon a few things. Maybe initially a little bit about sort of the money that's involved in political campaigns. Mm-hmm. We don't actually, the due date for school committee campaign finance reports was actually yesterday, but the only person who turned it in early was Freddie Fantini. All right, and typically people are late, which is unfortunate, and they usually review it first before they put it up. So it may actually be on the the election commission website by now. It's a little hard to find, but if you go poking around, you can find it, or just give me a call. I'll show you.
Right. So do we want to look at what we compiled?
Let's take a look here. This is sort of it's not the whole story, but this is what we have here is some of the information about campaign finance for city council candidates. Now again, there are 23 candidates, and I don't have them all listed here because those candidates who raised and spent very little money. There are three candidates who've raised no money and spent no money, so there would be no point in putting those in this table
There's only
here.
16 in this table.
Yeah, and there are a few who are just very minor, who are essentially there as kind of issue candidates or what have you. Right. So anyway, this is just a little taste of it. I had thought that I had the totals in this one, but I think that's actually in the table above. Maybe we'll get back up to that in a sec.
Okay.
But basically, the purpose of this was simply to show how, since there's a lot of rhetoric about campaign finance and who's raising money here and who's spending money right in there, this is a slice of life here that kind of just shows primarily it's sorted by what percentage of the money raised. And if you look over under total receipts, you'll see there's actually some pretty serious money raised.
Yes.
There are now.
Let's see, Jan Devereaux. Look at that.
Yeah, she's high, but the thing is, there are actually four candidates who've raised over $50,000, which was unthinkable in years past.
Jan Devereaux.
She's raised a lot of money. Mark McGovern's raised a lot of money.
Dennis Benzan.
And Leland Chung. Both of all three. And Nadine Mazin is up to 48,000. So. And Denise Simmons is 49,000. So you basically got about 6 candidates sort of hovering in the $50,000 range.
That was never like that.
Well, I mean, you'd have maybe 2 or 3 candidates who might total in a whole year. So this is pretty serious money being raised and spent here.
And so what's this other column? You have Cambridge percentage.
Yeah, so the thing is that what I just did is I computed, because you can see from the campaign finance reports where the money's coming from. So I just basically picked out all the donations that came from Cambridge addresses. And it's a little imperfect because sometimes people give a Cambridge address even for a business address or something.
True.
And it just isn't worth sorting all that out too much. There were some candidates don't do their reporting very well, so they don't actually put the city, and I had to sort of say, well, I happen to know that person lives on such and such a street, so I made it as good as I could.
Right.
You'll notice, though, that you can certainly crank up your percentage from Cambridge if you loan your own money to your campaign. So I had to put a column in next to it that shows.
Right, because we see that with
some candidates have put in $12,000 from some candidates.
Yes.
Mike Connolly and Minka Van Busicum.
Yes.
So their Cambridge percentage certainly goes up because they live in Cambridge.
Right.
Right, and I wasn't going to subtract that out.
Right.
So amongst the sort of more serious candidates, Jan Devereaux, Mike Connolly, Craig Kelly, Dennis Carlone have very high percentages from Cambridge. Down at the other end, it's Nadine Mazin, who has less than 20% of his donations come from Cambridge. And then up the next two, Marika Davidson, and on upward. So there are just 2 who have less than 30% from Cambridge. And I put in bold about 6 candidates who have greater than 70% from Cambridge.
I'm a little surprised that, Mark and David and Denise, who are all, previous counselors, have.
I mean, some of that is, and this is sort of part of the rhetoric of the campaign, is that if you receive money from people who are developing projects in the city, they may have addresses in another town. You know, so that certainly affects it. There's a lot of things that affect
True.
this.
So we can't just look at that.
Yeah. By the way, the rightmost column also shows expenditures, and you can see
Right.
now that
Yes.
there are some candidates who already spent
What
close
they have.
over 40,000, close to 50,000, and
Wow.
that's prior to the big mailings that are going out this
Yes.
week.
Somebody's
So-
overspent here. Who's
Yeah, well,
that?
some people actually had some money going
Mika.
into the
Oh,
year.
yeah.
So they started with some money,
Okay.
they added to it, and then they subtracted out from it, and they still have a campaign balance. Actually, if you scroll up just a wee bit,
To where?
just above this table, what you do is you could see there's just the very bottom line. I have there the totals
Okay.
of, it's kind of hard because there's a lot of information packed in there.
Yes.
But if I'm not mistaken,
Totals of what?
I think
Of
the total bank receipts for city election is now over $500,000.
Oh my goodness.
And the total expenditures so far are pushing $400,000 for all candidates combined.
Wow.
So
That's pretty impressive.
yeah, so I think we can
Okay.
kind of leave this here.
Swipe. There you go.
Look, I've
You did it.
successfully
You
changed
did it. Okay.
back to the camera. Right.
Remember, I'm
I
back
feel-
on camera. I like it
feel-
when there's other things there. I don't
Yeah,
have to worry about
I feel very, very accomplished.
it. Okay.
All right, so anyway, just so people are aware, there's you know, some of these issues about campaign finance are definitely floating out there, but in my opinion and my observation from the data is that there's no real bias on who's raising a lot of money and who's spending a lot of money. It seems to be like any candidate who's viable
Right.
is pretty much wanting to win back their seat or ensure their reelection if they're an incumbent. And they're spending money, and the closer
And
you
if
get
they
to
can
election,
get it, I guess. It's
you know, it's
okay.
not, you know,
Yeah.
if
Somebody believes in them.
you don't
Yeah.
spend it and then you don't win the
Right.
election, what are you gonna do? So
Right.
if you got it, you gotta spend it, and
Right.
and I'm sure there were some candidates really emptying out the accounts this week. I'm sure, I don't know how much it costs to run a citywide robocall campaign, but I'm absolutely certain you're going to be getting a lot of them this week.
Yeah, I won't answer the phone.
I mean, sometimes I do it only for just sort of
Yeah.
for posterity.
Right.
I actually still have on my answering machine a robocall from 2 years ago.
Do you? Wow.
One that involved, it was the
Answering
famous.
machine?
Yeah, it's an
You have
answering
an
machine.
answering
I do
machine.
have an
Of
answering
course you
machine.
do.
But
Yes.
it's the famed Pearl Harbor one. I kept
Right.
that one
Oh, okay.
from 2 years ago. So, all right. So next on the
School
doc,
committee.
let's
I wonder if we want to show that page of school just to.
we could do that. If
All
you
right,
wanna
is
sort of-
that
sort of
on
scroll
here
around.
now?
If you go to this
Candidate
pages, you can kind
Okay,
of
I'm going to do that
find
first.
that right here.
And this is city
Yeah,
council
it's
who we've talked about.
sadly, even though schools are a pretty important piece and it's the biggest budget item in the city as well. The truth of the matter is it's often sort of forgotten. You know,
Yes.
Unless you have children in the
Exactly.
schools,
Right.
people often just don't pay attention to the school committee race. In fact, in a typical election, if there are, let's say, like I think last year 2 years ago, there was 17,000-ish ballots cast for council,
Yes.
and there were, I forget how many, but there were hundreds and hundreds of ballots for school committee that were just inserted into the machine as blanks because
People
the
didn't,
vote-
especially young people
They
that have
didn't-
no
they-
kids in the school, or they
they-
just maybe have their favorite
Yeah.
city council candidate.
they said, they say, I don't know who these people are.
Right. Which is, I'd rather they
Yeah.
do that than
I
just
agree.
vote for
No,
somebody they don't know.
I absolutely agree. I mean, if you have no information at
Right.
all, then it's just would be a random
Right.
selection.
But it is
so.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so there's our 11 candidates. Monica Bowman, Pia
Yeah, I can't. it's just-
Ciccinino,
right.
Fran
Cronin,
Cronin,
who is an incumbent,
Jay Crutchfield,
who is
Emily Dexter, Freddie Fantini,
definitely an incumbent.
Richard Moki Harding.
Moki, I didn't know that.
Moki,
was
he's
his
always been
name.
called Moki ever since he was a kid.
All right,
Alechi Cadete, Kathleen Kelly, Patty Nolan, and David
Incumbent.
Weinstein.
right. Okay.
And
And who's not running? Because we do have an empty seat.
there's Mervyn Osborne, who's
Right.
an incumbent.
So that
and-
makes this more interesting because
Yes.
you do have to fill a seat.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely. Unlike the city
yeah.
council race where
Right.
all the incumbents are running, there is an open seat which
Right.
drew out more candidates,
Right,
or more serious candidates, I think is probably fair to say.
right,
And that's be them right there.
right.
Those
So
11.
you went to a forum recently, and
I
I
did.
So
I did.
any
I'm gonna sort of
ideas
go back
on
here. Oh,
what
look.
you gleaned from that? You're doing it.
I'm starting to get good at this.
Yes,
There
you
we go.
are.
I went to a forum hosted by the Ward 6 Democratic Committee last week, and I should sort of say that I find that a little weird that Democratic Party organizations are doing doing and endorsing candidates, because they're only allowed to endorse Democrats, and this is a nonpartisan election. There are no Republicans. There are no Democrats.
So what do you mean they were
people.
endorsing? I thought they were just holding a forum. No.
Yeah, but it's a long story. But
right.
some of the Ward 6 people really love to endorse because it gives them a sense of power.
Ward 6 is where?
I live in it, actually.
Oh, that's Mid-Cambridge.
Mid-Cambridge, one of the Mid-Cambridge wards.
Okay.
So they did. I thought they did a pretty good forum.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it. And the candidates touch on the usual stuff. It was the first school committee one I was able to get to, so I was happy to finally get to one.
Yes.
But the thing is, unless you have children in the schools,
It's true.
you
don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
Number one, and then
Yeah, my office mate at MIT has children in the schools, so she looks at everything totally differently than I do.
And
but
you don't go to school committee meetings. You go to the
I
city
tried,
council
but
meetings.
honestly, I find school
It's
committees
enough.
about as interesting as watching paint dry.
Wow.
So.
Whoa.
Well, no, I mean, the thing is they talk about the same issues every week.
Yeah.
And, and I teach mathematics, so honestly, I go in there like One Note Willie saying, well, tell me something interesting about how you do mathematics education in the public schools. And if they don't really get to actual curriculum, I just zone out.
Yeah. And they are doing some actually pretty amazing things,
I'm hearing some
That's
good
what I
things.
hear,
The way I hear it is sort of word on the street is we do a pretty good job in the elementary school. We seem to be doing okay with the high school these days. Middle schools are still kind of an experiment.
Work in progress. It's only the third year
of the so-called innovation agenda. But again, unless you have children in it and you're really seeing this up close, it's all secondhand information, really, in truth. Now you went to
I went to one last night that was sponsored by the Friends of CRLS, so it did focus on the high school. And again, I did have a daughter in the school system, but she's now 28. But I was pretty impressed by some of the people that I may not have voted for last time. I mean, I won't use any names, but they all seem pretty dedicated to wanting to see Cambridge kids succeed, and that was actually pretty nice to see. It wasn't about housing, it was about kids succeeding,
Right.
It wasn't about development, it was about how do you...
Human beings.
Well, it's also the inequality and the whole issues of, advanced classes. And I learned something new. CP is considered sort of...
What's CP?
Well, in my day, it was college prep.
Okay.
So in my day, and
where I grew up, it was College Point. That was the next town over.
Oh, you're funny. It wasn't, but seriously, when you went to high school, did you have like a college prep track? Kids going to college, and then you have the vocational track?
I think for all intents and purposes, we did. There was a lot of kind of tracking or quasi-tracking in the New York City schools.
So back then, it was considered, oh, you're going to college, the other kids are not. Well, now, apparently, it is considered where you dump a lot of kids. Because you have advanced and honor systems. So I'm learning a lot. So that was news to me because I didn't know what they were talking about. They kept saying CP, and I asked one of the candidates after, said it's college prep. I said, wait a minute, I thought that was kids. So things are changing.
What's one of the things I remember about when I was going to school committee meetings a few years ago is that you actually have to kind of learn the dictionary. There's certain like acronyms that they use all the time, or terminology, and their phrases they use. Like for example, I never in my life heard anybody talk around issues of equity. You talk to, but they always would say. And once you got elected to the school committee, they all started adopting their own language.
Equity. I'm trying to
and
think if I
talk around issues.
All right, maybe it was equity. I heard diversity.
The sort of the twin towers of the discussion that I would always hear is sort of some people were advocating for excellence, and others advocating for equity, and these don't have to be mutually exclusive. But they were often in competition.
Exactly, that's true. I mean, when my daughter was in the school system, they were changing every year in the high school to try to accomplish equity.
That's right.
Kids all the same, the 4 schools, and now it's like they brought back the honors classes. They didn't have any when my daughter was
I think
in school.
the restructuring of this, of whether it was the elementary school restructuring in the early 2000s or the middle school, the innovation agenda,
Right.
it always seems to be driven by the fact that if you let put any, and I think this is probably true,
Yeah.
it's almost like tax laws. No matter what
Yeah.
rules you enact, people
Yeah.
will find a way to beat the system.
Right. Well.
So-
yeah.
So they structure the schools in a certain way, and then people go, how can I get my kid into the best situation?
Right.
And then ultimately things start sorting out, and they kind
Right.
of get distinguished again.
Yeah.
And then there's time for another consolidation or another
Right.
innovation, right?
Right.
But it's funny if you look at all the candidate literature. There's like a phrase that the last few years you see all the time.
Yeah.
It says, "Quality education for all children."
Right.
And they
For
always
all-
say
right.
that because that's
Yeah.
a quietly saying like, well, not just for the elites
I
and
know.
not just for that. So it's a good sentiment, but it's become just rhetoric
Yeah,
at this point.
I hand it to anybody that wants to be on school committee, especially the teachers, because you can't really correct where the kids are coming from necessarily. And
It's tough.
So much of that is that.
Yeah, I think it's when
You
when
know.
people start dumping on the school system
Right.
or
They should be
the
doing more. They should be doing this. There's just so much they can do.
you're basically
You know?
being asked to correct all of society's ills.
Exactly.
And I think that's kind of a
Right.
kind of a
That's.
steep
Let's
order.
leave that up to Bernie and Hillary and
Yeah, I
Donald
mean,
Trump.
yeah,
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, I had one
Yeah.
interesting moment at the forum I went to, which is,
And you got to ask questions. So we
Yeah.
couldn't ask any.
yeah, and I didn't know that we were going to get the
Yeah.
opportunity. I was really happy that they allowed that. But candidates, a lot of times you talk about the things you have some control over.
Right.
So people are very talk about, well, we're going to institute this program or that program, and
Mhm.
so we've got program, or we need to spend more money on this, or we need to change the buildings or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I made my statement, which is that all that's well and good, but it's all kind of incidental.
Mhm.
And I just said, kind of in the sense I was like pulling rank. I said,
Mhm.
I've been teaching for 30, I don't know how many, but for decades.
Mhm.
And, from a teacher's point of view, education is not about buildings. It's not about budgets. It's not about, all these things are needed, but,
Right.
it's not about programs.
Mhm.
It's about a relationship between
Right.
a student and a teacher,
Right.
or a student and their teachers. And if you ask any kid or
Mhm.
any adult,
Right.
said, so you're now the president of the United States, or you're now an engineer here, or whatever. How did what was your biggest influence? They don't say, well, it was part of the ABC program or the particular building or the technology they did. They always say it was Mr. So-and-so,
Exactly.
Mr.
Exactly.
Pattison, or
Right.
Mrs. Schwartz,
It's a
or
relationship. You
Yeah.
have, and even if it's only one or two, it's something that you look forward to.
yeah,
Going
and
to school.
that
Yeah.
just seems to me so clear, so obvious. So that's
Yeah.
what I posed. I said, so if
Yeah.
you're an elected member of the school committee,
Uh-huh.
what's your perspective on sort of strengthening the relationship between teachers and students, and allowing teachers the freedom and flexibility to be creative and to be the very, very best that they can be? And several people went, "Ooh boy, good question."
So nobody really
Well,
could
no, I
address
think
that,
I think several of them.
Yeah.
I think maybe 3 or 4 of them really jumped on it and really gave some pretty
Mhm.
reasoned responses.
Mhm.
And it kind of led to a discussion about some of the more human aspects of, of the relationship between teachers and students. One candidate who grew up here, who's been
Mhm.
through the school system,
Mhm.
really tried to point to some of the really, really difficult circumstances that some of the kids coming out of his,
Right.
that they still call the projects.
Yes.
Right? There's a lot of kids coming from the projects who are in the Cambridge Public School System,
Right.
and the life they lead there isn't the best.
Right.
You may have single parent households, you may
Mhm.
have noisy households, you may have
Mhm.
unwanted activity in your households.
Right.
And, for them, and I kind of spun it a little bit, and I said, if that's how it is at home, you actually
Right.
could view this as an opportunity to have these young students, view the school building and
Mhm.
their teacher who they love
Mm-hmm.
as a sanctuary, as something they look forward to going to. And I
But
think
Probably has to start though before high school.
it absolutely,
You know?
no, it has to start in elementary school.
Exactly, because you need to say this is a place I can feel safe at.
Exactly.
And
that-
hopefully you translate that to the
Yeah.
high school, but
And I'm-
it's got to start early.
that's
Yeah.
always been my first question whenever I've moved from one job teaching to
Mhm.
another one place or another. Like I asked about the Harvard Extension School, tell me
Mm.
something about it. And I said, the one really great thing one of my colleagues said was, the thing you have to remember is that most of the students who are taking courses at the Harvard Extension School are taking them because they want to be there,
Right.
not because they were told they have to be there.
Well, but you have to be in school, though.
You have to be in school, but you choose into this because
Yeah.
you have a plan, you're really doing it. So what that means is that most of the students are actually paying attention, and they're really listening to you, and they're wanting to do work, and they're wanting to perform well. I mean, I've worked in other situations where I had, unfortunately, had to
Yeah.
do sort of a distribution requirement course, teaching a baby statistics class or finite math, where most of the students were only in the class because
They
there
had
was a
to be.
requirement that
Oh, okay,
a
I see
minimal
what you're saying.
math
Okay,
requirement.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
in a situation like that,
That's
the
true.
students
Yeah.
are tuned out from day one,
Right.
and it's
Right.
terrible.
No.
So it's a great thing when students
people
really
choose
want
to
to be there.
Yes.
So
Right.
anyway, so in the Cambridge Public Schools, I figured, well,
Yeah.
maybe there's a real opportunity
Right.
for that. So
Okay.
another thing, I actually get the same impression at some of the city council forums as well, but you really get it at the school committee
Right.
forums. It's that, and I've said this to people many times over, elections are about representation. That may seem like an obvious statement,
Yeah.
but people often don't appreciate that enough. They
Right.
think, I'm voting for this because they voted this way, or he said this, or he
Right.
said that.
Right.
But most voters, I think, are actually voting for candidates based on a sense of a relationship with the candidate, meaning he lives in my neighborhood,
Right.
he looks like me,
Right. His kids go to the same
his kids
school.
go to the
Yeah.
same school as me,
Right.
or
Or her kids.
I told him a joke and he got it.
Yeah.
So there's a camaraderie.
It's a personal
Yeah.
experience
In a-
with that.
Yeah, I mean, this may not be true at the national level.
No, I
in some
disagree.
ways it is. In some ways it
Iowa
is.
caucuses, they say it's all about, and
It's
that's
all
what
about-
Hillary's doing now. They
That's
say
right.
she's
It's
actually
one-to-one
meeting them
relations.
one-to-one,
It's
ordinary
absolutely
people.
true. And
Yeah. Yeah.
people that I think Tip O'Neill, actually it was a book by Chris Matthews called Hardball, really gives
Yes.
sort of the rules of politics. A great book if you get a chance to
That
see
was a
it.
show too, wasn't
And he
it?
named the show came later,
Oh, okay.
but he
Didn't
named the
know
show
that.
after the book.
Okay.
I have 2
Good to
copies
know.
of the book. I can
Oh.
loan you one actually.
Wow.
But he's got sort of rules of politics, and there's a big distinction between
Yes.
retail and wholesale politics.
Right.
So,
Right.
wholesale is, you hire skywriters,
Right.
you do big national
Right.
ads and whatever. But especially when you get down to the caucus level
Yes.
or in any municipal election, it's
Yeah.
all about handshakes
Yeah.
and chatting up people or having
Right.
coffee with them. It's very,
Right.
very much real person-on-person,
Yes.
retail level political stuff. So
Yes.
you can make the fanciest brochure, you can be as alarmist as you
They just
want.
go right into my recycle.
Yeah, you can
bag.
scare the dickens out of people with a
Yeah.
robocall about if you
Yeah.
vote for these people, the world will end. But ultimately, most voters, and I think I'm right about this, most voters are going to vote for people who they relate to.
Yeah.
Said
Or just took an interest in them.
just took an
They
interest.
could
in.
maybe have even a different viewpoint, but they cared about your viewpoint, or they maybe.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
if a candidate successfully illustrates the fact that they're really listening to you and not just pretending to listen to you,
Right.
then there's a good chance they're going to win you over.
Right.
Because
Right.
voters want that. But ultimately, it really is about being, remember, when you're electing your representatives, it's because they are representative. And especially in a proportional representation election system, that
Right.
might mean they look like you,
Right.
racially or ethnically or otherwise.
Right.
It might mean they are elected based on a distribution geographically throughout the
Right.
city. It may be based on issues, but in my opinion, the issues kind of comes in about third in the priority list, because ultimately, if somebody's a kind of a good, honorable person and you elect them, and you have a point to make, they'll listen to you, and no matter what they said before, you might convince them because
Right.
they're a quality person.
Right.
So ultimately, that's what's more important than what the hardcore position they
Right.
took on much of anything.
Now,
My end of editorial.
we have a few minutes left, and I'm very curious about your voter database you keep talking about.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
But one question related to that, I think, do you have any statistics on how many college students are registered to vote, and how many of them vote in the
You know,
municipal elections?
Generally speaking, I mean, what I can say is that there have been past years where there were precincts that were heavily centered in Harvard or MIT.
Yeah, because I've seen signs at MIT.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there was one election maybe 10 or more years ago where there was one precinct that was right at Harvard. 9 people voted. Meanwhile, in one precinct down in East Cambridge, 900 people voted.
Okay, so was that because a candidate maybe had come from some
The
school
students,
down there or something?
most of the college students are disengaged when it comes to municipal elections.
Right, unless that candidate went to that
That's right.
college and really
And they kind of do that,
promotes
but
registration?
yeah, so you can do that, but then
Yeah.
even if you register them, that
Yes.
doesn't guarantee they're actually going to come out on election
No,
day.
but
They go,
then
oh
that's-
yeah, I
But
forgot.
that's part of your job too.
That is
to get
definitely
them.
part of your job.
And
is
those are
having-
those phone calls are going
Absolutely.
well maybe to their cell phones.
Absolutely. So I had a little fun. I got the latest and greatest voter database. So we'll
Is that
sort of,
on here?
there may be, yeah.
Oh,
I
are
can
these
just sort of
facts?
say some of these
Or why
ones.
don't you
So
just say it? Okay.
just say, this right now as of Friday, there was 63,325 registered voters.
Wow.
45,000 or so are listed as active voters, which you can be an inactive voter and still
Does
vote,
that
by
mean
the
they
way.
voted in a
They
municipal or
any election recently,
Okay.
or if they signed a petition too.
Oh.
There were of those, there were 16,479 currently registered voters voted in the election 2 years ago. So in other words, almost everybody who voted 2 years ago is a registered voter now
Okay.
and ready to be elected.
But that's amazing. So there's 63,000 registered, but how many in 2013 were registered?
It was over 70,000 because it was right
And
after the
only
presidential election year.
Less than 17,000 voted in the municipal
Yeah, so it's
election.
about 25% of all
sad.
voters. Yeah.
That's pretty sad. But then
Some of the sort of more
national
fun
elections-
stuff,
Yeah.
there were over 5,000 new voters registered this year.
Oh.
There are 7,409 voters who are listed as student.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's like almost.
Yeah, I know, and that's not the whole of it. There's 1,109 professors, 161 listed as musician, and just since we're winding down here, I'll just
Okay.
end by naming there were
Alright.
9 registered voters
As farmer.
who were listed as farmer.
Okay, but that says something.
And on
a lot.
that note,
All right, we have to close this very interesting.
see you next week.
Bye from Judy Nathans and Robert Winters.
It's already over.